Friday, 28th of February 2026. 6 hours ago, Israeli media reported that General Amir Hatami, the commander-in-chief of Iran's regular army, had been killed in a coordinated U.S.-Israeli strike on Tehran. Not injured, not detained, killed. If confirmed, this would mark the elimination of the highest-ranking Iranian military officer in a single operation. According to Israeli sources cited by Republic World, Hatami was killed during a wave of strikes that began earlier this morning, targeting multiple sites across Tehran. Explosions were reported throughout the capital and beyond, but what followed was not what planners in Washington or Tel Aviv appeared to anticipate. Within 60 minutes of the first Israeli strike, Iran launched what is being described as the largest ballistic missile response in its history. 35 missiles were fired at Israel alone, according to the Times of Israel. But Israel was not the only target. CNN and other international outlets report that Iran simultaneously launched ballistic missiles at Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Kuwait. 4 countries, all American allies, all hosts to U.S. military forces, all struck at the same time. This was not retaliation aimed solely at Israel. It was a strategic signal to the entire region. Host American forces, and you become an Iranian target. That message was received immediately. Qatar's Ministry of Defense issued a statement condemning what it called a flagrant violation of its sovereignty after Iranian ballistic missiles targeted Qatari territory. In the United Arab Emirates, authorities confirmed that 1 civilian was killed in Abu Dhabi after being struck by missile shrapnel. Bahrain's naval support activity, home to the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, came under direct attack. Kuwait reported explosions. Jordan intercepted 2 ballistic missiles aimed at its territory. All of this occurred within a single hour. Iran did not pause. It did not deliberate. It responded instantly, and it responded broadly, striking multiple states at once. To understand why this matters and why this 60-minute response fundamentally alters the security equation in the Middle East, we need to understand who Amir Hatami was and why his reported death triggered such an extraordinary reaction. According to reporting from Caliber Azerbaijan, Hatami was the commander-in-chief of Iran's regular army, not the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That distinction is critical. He previously served as Iran's Minister of Defense from August 2017 to August 2021 under President Hassan Rouhani. Notably, he was the first defense minister in more than 2 decades to be drawn from the regular army rather than the IRGC. Iran's military is not a single unified institution. The IRGC controls the missile forces, the nuclear program, and Iran's foreign military operations. The regular army is responsible for territorial defense and conventional forces, operating under a separate command structure. Hatami occupied a rare position bridging both worlds. He was a veteran of the Iran-Iraq War, rose steadily through the ranks, cultivated close relationships with IRGC leadership, and understood both conventional and asymmetric warfare. On 31st January, just 4 weeks before these strikes, Hatami publicly stated that Iran's armed forces were on high alert. He warned that any enemy mistake would endanger regional stability. That warning now reads less like rhetoric and more like preparation. The timing is significant. According to updated reporting, Israel's defense minister confirmed that the strikes began at approximately 2 a.m. Eastern Time on 28th February. The operation was initially referred to as Operation Shield of Judah, before later being renamed Operation Lion's Roar by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Explosions were reported across Tehran. Targets reportedly included the Ministry of Intelligence, the Ministry of Defense, facilities linked to Iran's atomic energy program, senior leadership locations, and military bases. This approach closely mirrors Israel's campaign during the June 2025 conflict, in which more than 20 Iranian commanders and several nuclear scientists were killed in the opening wave. That earlier operation set the template: decapitate leadership, eliminate technical expertise, and strike infrastructure simultaneously. Israeli officials speaking to CBS News said that both Israel and the United States concluded that the cost of inaction had become too high. Intelligence assessments suggested Iran had spent between $700 million and $900 million over the past year funding proxy forces, including Hezbollah, Houthi operations in the Red Sea, and Iraqi militias targeting U.S. forces. The objective of the strikes, according to those officials, was to degrade Iran's ability to sustain proxy warfare while dismantling key elements of its nuclear infrastructure. What followed, however, suggests that Iran had anticipated precisely this moment and prepared accordingly. Iran's response, however, was not what Western planners appeared to expect. During the conflict of June 2025, Iran fired more than 550 ballistic missiles and over 1,000 drones at Israel across a 12-day period. Civilian areas were struck, a hospital was hit, and at least a dozen military, energy, and government sites sustained damage. But that escalation unfolded gradually. It left space for diplomacy, back-channel communication, and eventual de-escalation. February 28th was different. According to the Times of Israel, Iran launched 35 ballistic missiles at Israel within hours of the first strikes, and that was only one part of the response. Additional missiles were fired at Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Iran's state-linked Fars news agency confirmed the attacks, stating that military bases in each of those countries were targeted. That included Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the most important American air installation in the Middle East, and the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. Footage circulated showing a ballistic missile striking near Bahrain's naval support facilities. This was not a warning shot. This was not a near miss. It was a deliberate strike on American military infrastructure located on the sovereign territory of U.S. allies. The strategic implications are profound. Qatar hosts Al Udeid Air Base, home to roughly 10,000 U.S. personnel. It serves as the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command and functions as the primary logistics and command hub for American operations across the region. Bomber support aircraft, intelligence collection platforms, and critical command and control systems all operate from this site. In short, Al Udeid is irreplaceable. Iran knows this, and Iran targeted it. Reports indicate that at least 3 ballistic missiles were intercepted over the base. Interception matters here because it confirms the missiles were inbound. Qatari air defenses were engaged. Iran was not signaling intent. It was executing it. Bahrain presents an even more serious escalation. The country hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet, responsible for naval operations across the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and parts of the Indian Ocean. This fleet safeguards some of the most critical shipping lanes on Earth, including the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20 million barrels of oil pass every day. A strike on the Fifth Fleet's headquarters is not symbolic. It is a direct challenge to American naval power in the world's most strategically sensitive waters. Video footage shows explosions near naval facilities in Manama as air defense systems activated. While full damage assessments have not yet been released, impacts were confirmed in the target area. Iran demonstrated that it can reach the nerve center of U.S. maritime operations in the Gulf. The United Arab Emirates adds another layer of complexity. Authorities confirmed that 1 civilian was killed in Abu Dhabi after missile shrapnel struck a residential area. The UAE is the most economically developed state in the Gulf. Dubai is a global financial hub. Abu Dhabi is the political capital. The Al Dhafra Air Base hosts U.S. forces and, according to multiple reports, was among the intended targets. The UAE condemned the attack as a blatant violation of its sovereignty. That condemnation matters because Abu Dhabi had been actively pursuing a strategy of de-escalation with Tehran, expanding trade, restoring diplomatic engagement, and attempting to insulate itself from regional conflict. February 28th shattered that assumption. Iran demonstrated that economic integration, diplomatic outreach, and political moderation offer no protection if a country hosts American forces. The message was unambiguous. You may choose U.S. protection or Iranian restraint, but you cannot have both. Kuwait received the same warning. Ali al-Salam Air Base, hosting U.S. forces, was targeted. Explosions were reported, though immediate damage assessments remain limited. Kuwait has historically balanced its relationship with Iran against its reliance on American security guarantees. The February 28 strikes forced a stark choice: host American forces and risk Iranian retaliation, or demand a U.S. withdrawal and forfeit long-term security assurances. Neither option is politically or strategically comfortable, and both are now immediate realities. Jordan adds a fifth dimension to the crisis. The country does not host major U.S. bases, yet it intercepted 2 ballistic missiles aimed at its territory. Jordan's cooperation with American intelligence and its support for overflight rights for operations against Iran placed it in the crosshairs. Iran's logic is clear. Partnership with the United States, regardless of physical basing, now constitutes a legitimate target. This is a doctrinal shift. Traditionally, Iranian military doctrine restricted retaliation to Israel, seen as the occupying aggressor. Striking Israel was defensible as resistance against occupation. But targeting Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan represents a radical expansion of legitimate targets. These nations have no territorial disputes with Iran. They were targeted solely because they host or cooperate with U.S. forces. Iran has redefined its regional calculus. Any part of the American security architecture is now fair game. Muhannad Salam, assistant professor in critical security studies at Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, told Al Jazeera that Iran seeks to raise the cost for countries in the region that are close to us, aiming to compel them to pressure the U.S. to halt operations. This is a strategy of horizontal escalation. Iran cannot defeat America militarily, but can render American alliances politically unsustainable. Consider the mechanics. If Qatar suffers repeated missile attacks, if civilians die in the UAE, if Bahrain's infrastructure is compromised and Kuwait's economy is destabilized, domestic pressure on these governments will mount. Populations will demand protection. Governments will be forced to choose, eject American forces and risk Iranian dominance, or maintain American presence and accept ongoing Iranian strikes. Iran has engineered a strategic trap. Both options are undesirable, but both are now inevitable. The 60-minute timeline is particularly significant. Israeli strikes began at approximately 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Within an hour, Iran had launched a coordinated missile response across 5 countries. In June 2025, Iran required hours for leadership consultation, strategic planning, and messaging. This rapid execution demonstrates pre-planning. Missiles were fueled, targets were designated, launch protocols were ready. Once Israeli bombs hit, Iranian retaliation was automatic. The automation conveys a clear strategic message. In deterrence theory, credibility requires immediacy. Hesitation invites exploitation. By ensuring that any strike triggers an immediate, overwhelming response, Iran has strengthened its deterrent credibility. The implication for regional governments is stark. Any Israeli or American military operation now risks automatic Iranian retaliation against your territory, not out of animosity, but because your soil hosts the forces attacking Iran. The U.S. response has been equally consequential. President Trump confirmed that major combat operations against Iran have commenced. According to Pentagon sources, these are not limited strikes, but a sustained campaign lasting days, intended to degrade Iranian capabilities decisively. Yet Iran's 60-minute counterattacks ensure that every day of American or Israeli strikes is met with immediate, widespread retaliation, hitting bases, cities, and allies simultaneously. Blasts were reported from Dubai to Doha. This was not surgical targeting. This was area bombardment designed to impose both military and political costs. Iran has demonstrated the ability to create a regional crisis that forces the United States to shift focus from offensive operations to defensive measures, protecting bases, safeguarding allied civilians, and managing diplomatic fallout. The consequences are already visible. The UK government urged its citizens in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE to seek shelter, acknowledging that a wider regional conflict is underway. These are not predictions. These are current realities. The broader strategic calculus is sobering. U.S. and Israeli officials have stated that the objective remains the elimination of Iran's nuclear program and the degradation of its missile capabilities. Achieving that goal requires sustained operations over multiple days. Yet every day of strikes provides Iran justification for continued missile attacks against American bases and allied countries. Each retaliation amplifies political pressure on host governments, forcing them to reconsider the presence of U.S. forces. This, in turn, undermines American operational capacity while enhancing Iran's strategic position. According to Moran Kamra, director of the Iranian Studies Unit at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, Israel's timing suggests an intent to preempt diplomatic progress. Reports indicate that Omani-mediated talks had achieved significant progress just hours before the strikes. By initiating military operations at this moment, Israel, aligned with U.S. policy under President Trump, effectively prevented a negotiated settlement, prioritizing the elimination of threats over management or containment. Hatami's January 31st statement warning that any enemy misstep could jeopardize regional stability now reads as prescient. Iran's 60-minute missile response was not improvised. It was planned, executed with precision, and designed to demonstrate both military capability and strategic patience. The scale of the response is significant. 35 missiles struck Israel, while unknown numbers targeted Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait, potentially exceeding 100 missiles within hours. From an air defense perspective, Iran has demonstrated saturation attack capabilities. If defensive systems can intercept only a portion of incoming threats, some missiles will inevitably hit critical targets, producing both physical damage and political consequences. The asymmetry is stark. Populations in Qatar, 3 million, Bahrain, under 2 million, Kuwait, 4 million, and the UAE, 10 million, are concentrated in key urban areas. A single missile impact can inflict casualties disproportionate to the defending state's capacity. American forces absorb costs as Iran strategically imposes political and economic strain on host nations. Iran's message is clear. It can strike more easily than these countries can defend, and sustained attacks will force policy decisions in Tehran's favor. Iran's official statement confirms this doctrine. All American and Israeli assets and interests in the Middle East have become legitimate targets, and there are no red lines after this aggression. This represents a shift from limited engagement to total war, at least in the conceptual framing of Iranian strategy. The targeting list now includes every ally cooperating with the United States, from Saudi Arabia to Oman to Jordan, expanding the battlefield far beyond Israel. The multi-country dimension complicates diplomatic resolution. A ceasefire with Israel alone is insufficient if Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait remain under attack. Coordinating peace across 5 governments simultaneously is nearly impossible, while Iran maintains a centralized command structure. Supreme Leader Khamenei orders strikes directly. There is no coalition consultation. The United States, by contrast, must manage multiple allied governments, domestic political considerations, and international expectations simultaneously, a critical asymmetry in decision-making speed. Missile flight times underscore this advantage. From western Iran, ballistic missiles reach Qatar in 5 to 7 minutes, the UAE in 7 to 10 minutes, and Bahrain in 5 to 8 minutes. Warning times are measured in minutes, interception windows in seconds. Decisions must be immediate, pre-planned, and executed without consultation. Iran's simultaneous targeting of multiple states is not about rational military objectives. It is a deliberate exercise in strategic messaging. Should air defenses prioritize bases or civilian populations? Every choice reveals political priorities which Iran can exploit. Iran cannot defeat the United States militarily, but it can create circumstances in which American military power is secondary to political calculations. The 60-minute response against multiple countries demonstrates this principle. Civilians in the UAE die. Bases in Qatar come under fire. American operational assets are forced into defensive postures. Alliances are strained. Political crises emerge. This is asymmetric warfare at an operational and political level. Missile inventories, production capacity, and economic considerations are part of the calculus. Iran reportedly possesses 3,000, 5,000 missiles. Launching dozens at multiple countries depletes stockpiles rapidly. Production is limited, requiring weeks to replenish. Drones offer a cheaper alternative, inexpensive, mass-producible, and capable of saturating defensive systems. Iran can thus sustain attacks while preserving missile stockpiles, forcing the United States to expend interceptors and defensive resources at high economic and logistical cost. This sustained pressure tests allied cohesion. Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan have all condemned Iranian actions, but have not yet demanded American withdrawal. Iran is systematically probing for the weakest link. Strike Qatar, measure the reaction. Strike the UAE, measure the reaction. Identify vulnerabilities. Once a single ally ejects U.S. forces, a precedent is set. Coalition integrity fractures. Forward basing becomes impossible. Political isolation, rather than battlefield defeat, becomes Iran's strategic objective. Externally, regional opposition to American strikes is present. Turkey, Russia, China, Syria, and Iran-aligned militias provide diplomatic, strategic, or operational pressure against the United States. America's operational environment shrinks, forcing reliance on distant bases and carrier strike groups, which are expensive, limited, and vulnerable to Iran's demonstrated missile capabilities. Every decision is now compressed under a 60-minute cadence. Every strike triggers an automatic counterstrike. Diplomacy struggles to keep pace. Improvisation replaces planning. Mistakes accumulate, casualties rise, and escalation becomes increasingly likely. Iran's strategic masterstroke is not just the missiles themselves, but the tempo of action, a cycle of rapid retaliation that magnifies political consequences and tests American alliances at every turn. Intelligence gaps further complicate the picture. Hatami's death is reported but unconfirmed. U.S. planners must operate under the assumption that decapitation has succeeded. If it has not, Iranian command may be more coordinated and lethal than anticipated. Information becomes both weapon and vulnerability. Perception shapes policy, policy shapes operations, and operations reinforce perceptions in a continuous feedback loop. This is the new Middle East, a landscape where the death of a single commander triggers regional conflict, where 60 minutes dictates strategic action, and where mastery of asymmetric political and operational warfare defines influence more than conventional military power.